Now then, the Prime Minister continues his European tour this week, trying to win other EU leaders over to his plan to renegotiate Britain's relationship. Hasn't gone terribly well so far. Elements of the deal he's seeking are beginning to emerge, however. How will it be received, however, by the voters and by his own party? I should say that we asked the government for an interview with the minister on this or any other subject, but we were told none was available. But we do have the leading light in the Conservatives for Britain group I was talking about earlier on, the former Cabinet Minister, Owen Paterson. Welcome, Mr. Paterson.
Morning.
Now, this is going to be an important week for Britain and for Europe, of course, in the House of Commons, because you have the chance to debate and possibly amend the government's legislation. There's been a lot of talk about something called purdah, which I think a lot of people won't understand. Can you explain why purdah matters in this debate? What purdah is, why it matters?
Yeah, Andrew, purdah is crucial. Purdah means the government cannot use agencies of the state to spend money or to send information to citizens in a period leading up to an election. And this has been well established. We had long debates in the last Parliament, very senior figures like Jack Straw, John McGregor on our side. We came up with a compromise of 28 days that government agencies cannot spend money and cannot use...
Government as a machine stands back for 28 days.
Yeah, and I think that is absolutely fundamental. It is unacceptable that there'll be no limit to local government, national government, or above all, European government agencies spending money and sending information to citizens. And that is going to skew the whole thing. And the British people have a very, very strong sense of fairness. They will detect that this is being rigged. And if what worries me, and this is an absolutely really, really heartfelt plea to the government, it really worries me, if this is seen to be rigged, if the British people don't sense it's fair, whatever the result, it won't be seen to be legitimate. And this whole issue will fester further. What we need to do, we need to go back very clearly to the current rules on purdah, which we accepted as a compromise. 28 days we thought was not enough. We should go back to that. And the idea that government ministers can't function is nonsense. If you look at the rules of the last general election, you can go in a government car to look at a factory. You can't go there and announce a great
So this is essentially about fairness, because you've got the purdah issue you've just described so eloquently. You've got the possibility of the EU being able to spend large amounts of money to back the yes vote. You have a lot of big business coming behind the yes vote, and you are facing a referendum on a very tilted playing field, is your fundamental worry.
Absolutely correct. The EU has a massive strategic and selfish interest in the UK staying in the EU. They get 10 billion net from us. We're the second biggest contributor. We have big business constantly, through your medium, on the business programmes, on the business pages, trumpeting they want to stay in, because this is an organisation which suits the big fat cats.
Yeah.
And what I feel very strongly is that the British people out there running the small businesses were clobbered by all this regulation. They want to have a say, but if the whole thing is skewed from the beginning right up to polling day, it won't be seen to be fair.
It's the pikemen against the cavalry. Why do you think the Prime Minister is prepared to allow this to happen?
I really don't understand, because I think what is very bad is that this was brought in by the last Labour government, and I really do expect the Labour Party to go along with their own legislation. And we in opposition, led by highly respected figures like Dominic Grieve, and the Speaker, John Bercow, actually, we argued for a lengthier period of purdah. So there's a longer period for the people to wake up to an issue. Most people aren't in politics. They don't want to hear all this banging on about Europe. But they will need to know the facts and detail. If this whole issue is swamped right up to polling day, it will not be a fair poll. So I really would ask the government, very simply, just to withdraw this whole thing, go back to the 28 days, and that is simple.
If they don't withdraw it, will you try and vote them down, and would you have the votes to do that?
Well, we have put amendments down, and obviously it depends on the other parties. I mean, will the Labour Party stand by their own legislation, which we accepted as a compromise?
If they did, you could defeat the government on this.
Well, I don't want to. I'd very much prefer the government. And we're all so pleased we've got this bill. We're so pleased we've got a majority. At last, the British people are going to have a say. We really don't want an argument about this. And it's totally homemade, this. We don't have to have it. The government could withdraw this issue, and we could push on and re-establish the rules of purdah.
So your message is listen very intently and change course before worse things happen, really?
Please, we do not need a row about this. Just go back to the existing arrangements, which worked perfectly well in the general election. I said factories ran, ministers carry on their roles. They acted as ministers. When they were being political, they acted politically. And that's all we're asking.
If there is an unfair referendum and it's narrowly lost by the No campaign, what happens to the Conservative family?
Well, I don't like answering hypothetical questions. I hope we do have a very fair referendum and we have a proper choice put to the people.
That's at the heart of what you're worried about at the moment, really, isn't it?
Well, yes. Well, now, I'm generally worried about the British people who, out on the streets, there is, during the election, a lot of people are unhappy about the current arrangements. The current position with the EU is untenable. The EU is going to leave us. The Eurozone, to fix the horrors of the Euro, to save Greece, etc., is going to have to become effectively a new country. So we have a wonderful opportunity to go back to, or to leap forwards, actually, to a market arrangement. All this stuff that the EU is synonymous with market is nonsense. We could have a market arrangement, a trading arrangement, cooperation, get our role back on the international bodies that really decide regulation, and that would be very satisfactory, I think, to millions of people.
It sounds to me as if there is nothing that David Cameron could win in this negotiation and come back which would persuade you that we should stay inside the EU today.
No, I think the current arrangements are highly unsatisfactory. We haven't got the best of the market. I mean, Bloomberg's speech, he said we haven't really opened up services. And I'm very clear, we do not make our own laws in our own parliament. And the points are very simple. We want to have a trading relationship. We want to get back our key role on those world bodies. I mean, if you were given a choice, would you choose a Swedish psychiatric nurse with a career in social teaching at Gothenburg University to be our trade commissioner? No. We want a proper Brit representing the fifth largest trading nation in the world on the WTO. That's what we're looking for.
So when David Cameron is nonetheless engaged in a really, really difficult negotiation with his partners at the moment, Lord Heseltine has just said in the most urbane and polite way that people like you should pipe down for a while and let him get on with it. If he comes back having won, for instance, the right to remove tax credits from foreign workers coming over here for 4 years, that would be a major victory, wouldn't it?
Yes, I'm absolutely delighted that Lord Heseltine wants to join our club. It's brilliant, so we'll add him up. Steve Baker will probably be watching you put another tick on the peers list.
Sounds unlikely, but...
we've been very careful. I totally agree with Michael. We do not want a rancorous row about this. We want a serious debate, because this is a real discussion as to whether this organisation we're part of is a market relationship or whether it is effectively a political entity. I didn't like the tones that the ancient English kingdom is going to get subsumed, because that's where this thing is heading. And we know it was always a political project. So there is this division. But I've been very careful not to give a list of things to the Prime Minister. He started this process. He only got going 10 days ago. He's been very canny, I think, not outlining the detail, and we should back him. So it's quite clear we give him time to get a deal, but we do prepare in case the deal is not satisfactory.
I absolutely promise that I'm not going to go through a long list. However, the issue of a parliamentary red card is raised again and again. How important to you is, as it were, the absolute sovereignty of the British Parliament in this negotiation?
Well, I think it is absolutely vital. I mean, I found...
Because that's not something, as we heard from Philip Hammond last week, that can be negotiated.
No, you've got all these eager beaver new MPs thrilled to bits to be elected to Parliament, and they're told they don't count, because decisions will be made by an outside body. You know, we are the fifth largest economy in the world. We can make our own decisions. We can cooperate with the Anglosphere. We can cooperate with the Commonwealth as an independent nation and have the very best cooperation with our trading neighbours. So I do think parliamentary sovereignty, making our own rules in our own parliament and kicking out the rascals if we make bad laws, is absolutely fundamental.
So we're not going to get those things from this negotiation. So this renegotiation is not going to alter our relationship with the rest of the EU fundamentally enough to persuade many Conservatives that it's time to, it's right to stay in the EU rather than leave it.
Now, give the Prime Minister a chance. He said he wanted fundamental change in our relationship.
So what would fundamental change be from your point of view?
Well, I want to go to trade and cooperation, and I want to get away from political and judicial arrangements. I mean, every day I was doing DEFRA, I was making a judgment as to how far I could push Commission law without being fined. The first day I got in, I found we were being fined £600 million because of the mess the last Labour government made of CAP introduction. Now, that is going on the whole time. You don't need to have that sort of interference in your own country to trade with people.
So, you see, Philip Hammond told me last week, sitting in that very chair, as it happens, that any attempt to give the House of Commons sovereignty in these arrangements is completely impossible to negotiate because it would be the end of the EU as it is. So that's off the agenda entirely. If that's off the agenda entirely, there is nothing, I put you again, the Prime Minister can negotiate that is going to satisfy you.
But that was always the intention. Going right back to the Island of Steel,
satisfy you.
They wanted to overrule the democratic states. And that's why I say they are effectively leaving us. To fix the euro, they have to create this new entity, a new nation, where you can shift money from Germany to Greece, etc. We have an opportunity to have a totally new relationship. And this is what I interpret the Prime Minister's terms, fundamental change. We want to have a trading and cooperation relationship with this endless nonsense about the EU being synonymous with the market. It's not. And then also we want to make our own laws in our own parliament. And we can negotiate that if we really try. So this group is really beefing up the Prime Minister's negotiations. You know, stuck on the Hill, eating his Semmelbrot with Angela Merkel, that will have had an impact. They have to wake up to the fact that
it's a big group. You've got 110 MPs.
And we've got a majority in Parliament, and we've got a Prime Minister committed to a process.
Do you have cabinet ministers in your group?
We're not getting into names.
I know. I'm not asking for names. I'm just asking, do you have
There's a whole variety
do you
of
have
people,
cabinet ministers in your
people
group?
right across, but we've agreed not to mention names.
I know. So, I'm not asking for names, but do they include cabinet ministers?
There will be support. Yes,
will be support in the cabinet.
Yeah. But okay. we're not named. We said we won't give names. But this really does strengthen the Prime Minister's hand. He goes there now with a majority, which our European neighbours didn't expect. He goes there with a bill in Parliament, which is going through now. And here's this group pushing for really fundamental change. That's what we're saying. We're saying the current arrangements are not acceptable. We want something which is really fundamentally different.
Do you think that if ministers are not allowed to speak openly, to voice their own conscientiously held opinions about Europe inside the government, they will be forced to resign? And what would that do to the Conservative family? Well,
as I understand it, it's for them to decide, but as I understand it, we let the negotiations run, and then if there are ministers who don't like the final settlement, they can leave the government and campaign for a no. I mean, I think
you feel they would have to leave the government first?
Well, I think it would be better if they stayed within the government, but it's really up to them and their conscience. It'd be better. I think it would be better if there was a free choice.
Very briefly, one other big issue this morning in the papers, we were talking about it all day, is ISIS and the perception by a lot of our chiefs of defence, or former chiefs of defence staff, as reported in the Telegraph, that we have become an enfeebled country, disarming far too fast in front of a really serious new threat.
Yes, I read that with real care. I mean, I gave a speech in Washington just before the election, pointing out that at the time of the Falklands, we were spending 5% of GDP. And I don't get hung up about these particular percentages, but the point I made is that should world circumstances change, we've taken a massive peace dividend since we got rid of the Soviet Union. Sadly, we have to rearm. Now, we have corrected the awful 38 billion mess we had in the defence budget. We are building aircraft carriers and new kit. What I said in Washington, sadly, we have to have a proper review, which is what I think these senior defence figures are asking for, which looks at what is the kit required at the moment. Is it aircraft carriers? Is it new cyber for GCHQ? And frankly, I think there will be people like me who will say, it's not the 2% we got the hang up, it's making sure we have the right equipment required to defend this country under the new circumstances which have sadly deteriorated in the world.
That means more money. So would you like George Osborne to rethink the £500 million cut, for instance, already announced the defence budget halfway through the year?
I think it would be better to do what the defence chiefs have suggested, which is to have a real review, to make an analysis of Britain's position in the world and see what kit we need. And then, under the very difficult constraints, where we're still borrowing £200,000 a minute, see where that money comes from.
Owen Paterson, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.